We are so happy to be back with you in New York City for our second annual Axios Communicators live event. And there are so many parties going on, so I appreciate everybody making the time, coming out tonight. As I mentioned, after our programming, we'll have lots of time for networking, drinks, and bites. And I also want to point out that we have a cool wall back there where you can take photos, new headshots for your AI-generated profile picture on LinkedIn, your team photos that you'll put on your refrigerator, so all those great things. But thank you again for coming out tonight. We have a great evening for you where we'll talk to some of the biggest names in the communication fields about the tough topics that you're dealing with. I'm feeling incredibly outnumbered. Sitting out here is the kind of folks that I interact with on email as a reporter. But my confession is that before I became a journalist, I was in your seat. I actually worked in product comms and marketing and business development for a big bank before I switched careers. So I have great understanding of what you do and great empathy of what you do. So I'm excited to moderate one of the conversations tonight. All right, well, thank you all for, again, being here tonight. And without further ado, I'd love to welcome our very first guest. You may know him from his former stint at the White House. He's now the Executive Vice President of Communications and Advertising at United Airlines. Please welcome Josh Earnest. Hey.
How are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you for being with us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Hello, everybody.
Great crowd. The holiday vibes are here.
They are.
This is the last week where people do work. And then next week, maybe you'll do a little work, but mostly it's prepping your out of office for the rest of the year. First off, congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you.
It's huge, also because your role is so unique now that you have both comms and advertising. Usually the houses do not mix. So explain how the role came together and why it was important in Scott's mind to really have it together.
So we did have a conversation about the real benefits of being able to integrate and really force the communications team and the advertising team to work together.
Yeah.
And the benefits are significant. One is the communications team speeds up our advertising operation. We operate at a higher velocity now. And whether that is swapping out digital billboards in the airports to sort of capitalize on PR opportunities we've exploited. We, one of the things that we did last year in the midst of the baby formula shortage that got so much attention, we were actually the first airline to volunteer to fly baby formula from a production facility in the UK back to the United States. And Vice President Kamala Harris came and welcomed one of the shipments. Lots of PR attention around it. We actually quickly turned that around into digital billboards in all of our hub airports, so that we weren't just promoting this in the news. We could actually use advertising platforms to promote it. And so it's just a good example of how those two, sort of expertise-driven models could really reinforce one another.
But this was something that was evident as a necessary and an important move. But in most companies, this is not the view, and there's tension a lot of times between all the different areas where messaging comes out, whether it's marketing, whether it's advertising, or under marketing or comms. How do you allay some of those tensions when it comes to getting everyone on the same page with what a message should be coming from you?
Sure. Look, every organization, every large organization, and sometimes even small organizations are going to have trouble getting everybody on the same page. That's part of that's being part of a human enterprise. What we have done, and in many ways what we proved at United is it was a proof of concept to really turbocharge our PR operation. And then to combine that with a social media team that sharpened up our social media presence, and being able to do those two things successfully, I think is what built confidence internally that adding advertising to the mix was just the sort of the natural outgrowth of that opportunity. I think the second advantage that I have in sort of running a structure like that is I serve on our executive team at the airline. And so what that means is it means that our comms team and now our advertising team are at the table when we're making big strategic decisions about what the airline should do. And so that gives us an opportunity to influence certain policies and other big decisions that the airline is facing so that we can get the maximum PR and advertising benefit if we choose to go down a certain path.
How do you convince, or how would you help others convince their leadership to give them that same seat at the table so that they're there at the beginning and not when it's just time to launch something and you gotta write the press release?
It's really challenging. And I think what I have found is there are leaders that get it and leaders that don't. And
in this day and age, I mean, it seems pretty evident that communications is everywhere and that you need a very cohesive strategy.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look at brands that sometimes get in trouble, it's because they were making decisions without having an eye toward the reputational aspects of the decision. And I think it also comes down to trust. I think that there are leaders who are looking, leaders of companies, leaders of enterprises, who want to make sure that their comms have the kind of judgment that they need, that they can rely on. So I think that maybe that's the best piece of advice is the way to is to build those kinds of personal relationships and build that kind of trust with the leader that you're serving so that when they have a big decision to make, they feel confident about including you.
Are you surprised that there are still leaders out there who don't get it about comms?
Look, I don't think it's that they don't get it. I think it's that they think about comms in a very narrow way, right? They don't think about it as integrated through everything that they do. But the reality of the world that we're operating in is that everything has a reputational component. It's hard to think of a decision that isn't going to influence the way that people think about you. In some cases, it may just be your employees, or it may just be your most loyal customers who are going to do business with you anyway. But there's always upside to making decisions in a way that gives you an opportunity to engage and reinforce the kind of relationship that you have with either your employees or your most valued customers.
How do you organize your team? Is it based on the various stakeholders that you have, and that's where you're sending the troops in? So whether it's with your crew, whether it's internal, corporate comms.
Yeah. So we have discrete verticals that are dedicated to employee communications, PR, social media, and then we ask those each of those organizations to work across the business. And what that does is it forces us to put the impetus on our leadership team, and oftentimes me, to make sure that those teams that are all under the communication structure are all communicating with one another. And so one of the things that I try to do for those teams is a little bit of it has to do with demand. And the demand is this, which is I do not demand that they come to me and check every decision that they want to make. That our team is going to be successful and nimble and most effective if people who are on my team feel like they are empowered to make decisions. However, what I also try to do is I try to meet the demand that they have for information about what's going on in the company. They're going to make better decisions, A, if they're empowered, but also if they have a 360-degree view of what's going on. So I try to be as transparent as possible with the entire team to make sure they're aware of what's going on all across the business so that when they're in a position where they have to make decisions, they can do so with the vantage point and with full awareness of what's going on at the company.
But you must also have a lot of clarity in those instructions. I mean, this is obviously something they know to expect and know to do.
They have some expectations that that I'm going to share as much information as I can, but the toughest decisions don't have clarity. You don't have access to perfect information. You don't know exactly how things are going to turn out. There is uncertainty, and that's what makes those decisions tough. Those are the times where I want people to use their judgment to come to me and talk about those decisions. But the more effective that I can be in sharing information and empowering members of my team to make good decisions, the less often they're going to have to come to me and get sign-off. That means our team is going to be more effective, they're going to be more decisive, and they're going to be faster.
One of the things that you really strive for is to be ready for anything. It's a hard environment.
It's the nature of the airline business, for sure.
In crisis, always, right?
Yeah.
So what is the best way to do that for really any brand outside of this industry, the airline industry?
Yeah. There's a former colleague of mine who observed that a crazy thing could happen tonight in a Hilton hotel room and nobody would care. But if it happens on board a plane, it's going to be leading to today's show tomorrow. And that's the nature of the business. So we do have a very well-developed, well-exercised crisis communications team. One of the keys to their success is that they're watching social media closely. The other thing that they do is they are actually embedded in our National Operations Center. So we've got people that cover between 18 and 20 hours a day who are sitting next to the people who are running the nuts and bolts of the airline so that they can stay close to them and they can share information. There definitely have been times where we faced crises where information was coming in on social media that helped inform operational decisions. But much more common We are starting to see weird things on social media, or our PR team gets calls about things that have happened, and having a direct line to the people who are running the operation of the airline is critical to our ability to respond in a timely fashion. The other thing that we can do is we can detect problems early and try to head them off using the operation. So if somebody has a bad experience on board a plane and they start tweeting about it, we can meet them at the gate and say, we're really sorry about your experience, what can we do to make it better? Sometimes the best way, what's that, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure?
Yes.
That applies in this situation too.
So we talked about the reactionary strategy. What about planning for global events that we've seen this year? We're seeing a lot of politicization of pretty much everything. How do you decide what issues the brand should weigh in on?
Yeah. The way that we think about responding to those sort of politicized, almost societal issues is, my days of trying to figure out how can we word a statement so that we can take the right position, that was an earlier stage in my career. I did that. What we try to focus on at United is to think about what are actions that we can take that demonstrate what we believe, that demonstrate what our values are so that people understand what we're about. So the best example I think on this is probably on sustainability. United Airlines alone burns billions of gallons of jet fuel every year. We are a carbon intensive business. And the best way for us to demonstrate that we actually do care about the planet and we do care about sustainability and want to be a leader in that space is not to go and just tell people that we care about it, but to actually take steps to show that we do. So we have invested in more sustainable aviation fuel than the rest of the world's airlines combined. That's something that we are all in on. We lobbied intensively on Capitol Hill for the Inflation Reduction Act because it included significant subsidies that would allow producers to produce sustainable aviation fuel at scale. So those are actions that demonstrate how we feel about some of these issues. We're not worried about taking positions, we're worried about taking action.
You have you had a very different career before taking this job. I'm sure you were courted by many companies after your press secretary stint. So why United?
Yeah, I laugh because that is not how it felt at the time.
Okay.
Apropos of your question before about how do you sort of make sure that, or how do you create an environment where the leaders of the company sort of want to bring you in and not just sort of hand you a pencil and say, write a news release about this decision that we've already made. The truth is, when I was leaving politics and interested in trying to join the corporate world, I met with all kinds of business leaders and had lots of really interesting, friendly conversations. But there were multiple times that I walked out of meetings with important people where I enjoyed the conversation and I could tell they did too. But I could also tell they walked away thinking, he seems like a really smart, nice guy, but how the hell is he going to help me run my business? And one of the reasons that my experience at United has been so fulfilling and I think has gone so well, both for me and hopefully, I think most people would say the airline, is that people who worked at the airline saw right away that this guy doesn't know anything about the airline business, and they were right about that. But there is a way for him to help us. There is an expertise that he has. In fact, our current CEO, Scott Kirby, talks about the process that they went through to fill the job that I have now. And he likes to say, and I'm sure this story is probably a little apocryphal, but he says that he sat down with the recruiter to look through a binder of resumes for potential candidates. And he sat down and started combing through this binder of resumes thinking to himself, why on earth would anybody want this job? This seems terrible. Why would anybody want it? And he got to my resume and says, well, wait a minute, this guy's had it worse.
Okay.
So, but what he meant, what I like to think that he means by that is that there are lots of bad headlines that I've worked through. Lots of difficult, high-stakes situations where I've had to keep my cool and try to help other people make really good decisions. And turns out that's come in really handy in this business. Even at the time, I started in May of 2018. I don't think anybody knew we were going to go through a global pandemic in which our business was going to decline by 98% almost overnight, but it did. And so some of those skills came in pretty handy as we were trying to manage the airline through the worst crisis we'd ever faced.
Well, I need to steal time. I'm sorry, I got the wrap. But what are you doing to educate yourself on AI and to prevent your teams from being made obsolete with AI?
Yeah, I'm not worried about communicators or our teams being made obsolete by AI. These AI tools are incredibly powerful, and I'm impressed by them. But even based on some of the work that we're experimenting with at United, it is clear that the influence of a human being that has a really clearly honed set of communication skills is essential to the success of those tools. That making them communicate clearly is not something that they learn right away. They have to be taught, and the only way they can be taught is if they're edited. So people that have the ability to write clearly and persuasively and quickly and have a passion for doing so are always going to create enormous value for companies like United Airlines.
All right, Josh, we're out of time.
So,
love smart brevity, hate this part of it. Thank you so much for joining us. Josh Earnest,
really
everybody.
Thank you
Thanks so much.
Nice to see you, everybody.
Great to chat.
Thanks a lot.
Communication is the backbone of any successful organization. Axios HQ helps leaders break through, giving their teams the tools to plan, compose, and deliver more effective internal communications in smart brevity. And hundreds of organizations say it's helping them punch above their weight. 90% have said it's helped improve engagement, 88% say it's had a positive impact on their internal comms, 82% say it's helping them collect employee feedback, and over 50% say it's saving them time. We say it's helping all of us write less, but say more. To learn more about Axios HQ and Smart Brevity, visit AxiosHQ.com.
Up next, our View from the Top moderator, Axios publisher Nicholas Johnston.
Good evening. Thank you all so much for being here. Whoa, holy cow, this is more than I thought. Thank you all so much for being here today. Nothing we do at Axios would be possible without the support of all of you folks, for coming today, for signing up for Eleanor's awesome newsletter, for reading all of our other great stuff. We couldn't do any of this without you, so we're really grateful for you for making it possible tonight. And we're also extra grateful for our partners who help make all these things possible. They help fund our investments in events like this, the delicious snacks in the back, and the investments in journalism that we make. So a huge, huge thanks to our partner who made tonight possible, the Weber Shandwick Collective. And so I'm very excited to welcome to the stage for a View from the Top conversation, Weber Shandwick's Chief Innovation Officer and Chairman Futures, Chris Perry. Chris, welcome to Axios. How are you? Good evening. So I want to start with you have the coolest job title in the world. What does a chairman futures do all day?
Where do you want to start? So we created a group within the firm a few years ago that is a media lab, in part because we saw a lot of these big changes that are hitting the comms world early, and we felt like we had to build some capacity inside of the company to anticipate things like disinformation, the rise of AI. Metaverse is still, a thing looming out there, so we have a team of people studying some of the trends, and we spend a lot of time with VCs, product studios, and leading universities to kind of anticipate what's to come.
It's to think about what's over the horizon and figure out ways to explain it. So, okay, so let's talk about the thing over the horizon that is so hot right now, AI. How are you talking about it? How is it reshaping the industry?
It depends on what room you go into.
We're in this one.
Yeah, I think we all know that, again, it's one of the biggest stories of the year. I think we are all on the front lines of a massive, massive, shift in culture. And again, the reason why I reflected on rooms we go into is some rooms we go into, people are very bullish, aggressive, entrepreneurial, curious and active, and others are still resisting what's really hard to resist given how many people are already using these things.
Right, so take us into a room with a client. What are those communications like? Do they tend to be more resistant? Do they embrace it, or are they all over the map? How do you lead them along this path of what you see that's coming?
Well, I think we're all starting from the same place, right? So we're all learning together at the same time. We start our client engagements with just orientation. There's so many ways of thinking about AI, so many ways of kind of coming in and figuring out which tools to use. And what we found in our client work is when we're in rooms together with groups and we are looking at not just ChatGPT, but other platforms that can help us, not only create content, but do proper research, that when we engage in hands-on exercises, one, it takes the fear factor down, and two, it kind of opens up people's minds to how this is a game changer for what
So
we do.
is the first step even education? Like showing them, like maybe they have a view of what the technology is because they played around with it, or their kids have played around with it, or they've seen it on TV, showing them what the capabilities actually are.
It's an actual experience versus a theoretical experience.
Exactly.
This isn't decks and theory, and is the world going to end, or is this the greatest invention that's ever been made? It's how do you apply it to marketing and communications work?
Right. And so once you have that educational, how do you translate that into practice in those conversations?
So we follow 3 steps. One is this orientation territory that I mentioned. You have to build things. Like, you can't learn unless you're making stuff and building things. So that's the pilot phase. And some of our clients, again, are pretty progressed with this stuff, and they're thinking about redesigning their functions with AI at the center.
Right. To take it away from the client thing, can we dig in a little bit more about what it means for the industry? Your colleagues in the field, are they viewing it with open arms? Do you see yourself as someone who is trying to help them understand that it's happening and inevitable, or trying to convince them to use it, or talk them into the reality of perhaps this situation?
Yeah, I think what is a bit of a misnomer when we get into conversations is this year has been really about ChatGPT and all the derivatives of it. And that's really about how do we think about these AIs to make content, right? We found that these tools are incredibly powerful for research, for testing ideas, for expanding our thinking, and we just have to go through a bit of a perspective shift to not only support the work we've always done, but there are all new ways that we're going to have to communicate and understand information flows going forward.
Yeah, and this is a little bit we talked about backstage, about where the human fits into that. Where do you put the human in this paradigm?
Very pro-human.
Shift, right?
very, very pro-human. I mean, everyone in this room who's used these tools, it takes a lot of work to get the output from these, whether it's in a research context or a creative context. You just can't put a prompt into an engine and think that something is going to come back that's going to be engaging or human-like, or something that really is going to, grab people. And so, if anything, again, we use these tools not to automate our work, but to elevate our work.
Right, and then as a tool for the human, as opposed to, I think where the danger is that we've talked about is as a replacement. The trust level is just not there.
I just don't see it yet, and I think one of the major issues that the AI companies have is, you have ChatGPT that can give you a lot of output, but it's a black box, and you don't know what the models are pulling from. You go to a platform like Perplexity, and they actually show you what the sources are for the response. There needs to be more transparency on what comes through the other side if it's going to be a fully useful tool for the people in the room.
I feel like it's going in that direction. I feel like a lot of these chat models are like saying that, are trying to crack open the black box as much as they can.
They're going to have to.
You talked about these models as a silo buster. What do you mean by that?
I can't foresee a future 2, 3, 4 years from now where you can have marketing, PR, internal comms, even those that oversee risk and reputation being in separate silos. This technology cuts across, is going to create incredible efficiencies. We spent a lot of time with NVIDIA. They're a partner of ours. They've shown us other use cases from entertainment, car design, different sectors, where when you have a single view of a creative product, whatever it is, on the same system, it breaks global silos down and it breaks functional silos down. In the time that we can turn creative around is extraordinary if we think about the way this is going to change our work, not just our kind of inputs and outputs.
Well, like dig in a little more. Like, let's look over the horizon, right? Chairman of Futures. If we're looking a year or 2 years out, like, what should this room be preparing for?
I think we have to flip our way of thinking from AI as a output device to AI as an input device. We have to think not only about the application of AI, but the implication of AI. This is synonymous to the internet, to social media. It's not just, again, about like output. It's about a change in culture, politics, truth, trust, all these things. Like, we're going to have to be really, really great counselors whether we're sitting on the agency side or client side, to help make sense of what's going on in the world.
Great. So like before we wrap up here, let's take 2 questions, like spinning it ahead a little bit. For comms people, how is 2024 going to be different from 2023?
Put your mouth guard in. It's going to be, I think, a pretty extraordinary year because you have a convergence of changes coming together. You've got the tech stuff that we're talking about, but the social issues that we're all consumed with, whether it's some of the fronts on the culture war, again, political election, like the issues are hard in the ways that people are going to interact with the media is going to change, and those two forces are going to come together, which means, again, we have to accelerate our understanding of how these tools can help us.
And then layer ChatGPT and deepfake videos on top of that and enjoy next year.
Yeah, I think everyone in this room, whether you're agency or client side, needs a media
So
lab. It's moving too fast.
Let's end on one fun thing, Axios tradition. What are you most excited about in 2024?
Can I be shameless?
This is a layup for you. It's your stage, pal.
So I will be working through the holidays because my first book is coming out in January. And it's relevant to this discussion because it looks at the social impact of AI and new technologies. And a lot of the focus to date has been around new tools and the tech titans, trying to see who's going to win the future. And we all in this room have to think about social implications of this stuff, how it changes media discourse, how it's going to raise the temperature on mis and disinformation. And we have to understand the causes of what's happening, not just, again, what's happening.
Trying to collect in one place maybe a toolkit for people to
It's a
think
toolkit.
about whatever is over the horizon.
Toolkit and
coming
case
at us.
studies, real stuff that's not just like theory or prognostication.
Tremendous. Chris, thanks so much for being here today, and a big thanks to Weber Shandwick Whip Collective for making it happen.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We are living in an explosive moment. A wrong message or no message at all can destroy executive trust or pull your brand into the eye of the storm. Comms leaders see that clearly. You are the trusted advisor, the person with a plan who can help your fellow leaders build trust before you need it, feel how deeply personal current events can be, and decide what to say or not. Axios HQ is helping over 600 comms leaders connect their teams and catch their breath. Our internal communication tools lets you set communication standards, define voice and tone, develop an archive of referenceable messaging, offer approvals before updates go out on email, Slack, or Teams. And it helps other leaders communicate with confidence, only sharing what's essential, collaborating with the right people, and sending updates in a timely, consistent manner. Axios HQ is the best way to scale your communications team so you can build trust right now, before you need it. Learn more about our tools at axioshq.com.
Please welcome communications strategist and writer and author of the Axios Communicators newsletter, Eleanor Hawkins.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Hi. Thank you so much for being here. It's really exciting to see so many familiar faces. Thank you for joining us for our annual Axios Communicators event. I'm really excited about our next guest. She is a crisis communication expert. She's also a TikTok star. Please welcome Molly McPherson. Hi, Molly. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us.
Of course, love being here. Hello, everyone.
So you have 500,000 followers on TikTok, and you mainly cover the job of communicators, right? You mainly cover the intersection of culture and PR. But I read somewhere, or I heard somewhere, that you initially joined the platform just for research purposes, right? So what have you learned by being present and active on TikTok?
Lurking on TikTok, as most people know, will garner a lot of information for you, but not a lot of eyeballs. So I liked it for the one-sidedness of it. However, you really can't get to the heart of what makes TikTok work and not work unless you put yourself out there. And even though I work in public relations, it was the most nerve-wracking thing to do, to put myself out there, because now I am under scrutiny as well. But when you're out there, people come to me and tell me things. So the information is so rich. That's why I like it.
The other thing I've heard you say is that you can tell if a crisis has really gained momentum based on how many people tag you in certain videos and based on the incoming that you receive.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, like, what are you seeing now? What do your DMs look like now?
Well, I've turned into a blind gossip creator and I didn't even know it. So I get a lot of scoop, a lot of inside scoop, which tends to always pan out, which is interesting. But there's a lot of requests. People want to see the breakdown on something. And that is probably of all the things that I learned what interests people and what interests the public. And they love the behind the scenes more than seeing people come down. I think that's a misnomer. People assume that people love cancel culture and people being wiped out. They love to see the machinations of why it happens.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned, speaking of blind gossip, blind items, I was listening to you on the Demois podcast, strictly for research purposes. And you said something that I thought was really interesting, and I want to quote it because I thought it was so good. You said, in this day and age, the press and editors, fixers and lawyers can't control public opinion. Social media controls it. What do you mean by that?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I worked in comms in the 90s. I was in Washington, D.C. I was a director of communication for the Cruise Line Association. I also worked for FEMA. I was doing the work on, that everybody else could see. But nowadays, it seems now that there's social media, we went from having traditional media where they ruled, they had the power, people had to listen to them, whatever they had to say. But now the public, when they mobilize together, have such tremendous power. I mean, put them up against any lobbyist out there and they will win. That's what's changed.
That's kind of scary for communicators, right? So how can they respond to that? When are they supposed to respond to that? How do you advise your clients on what is a viral trend that we need to acknowledge and what is just somebody in their basement, airing their grievances?
Right. Important to understand the distinction. Yes, it's terrifying for communicators, even more terrifying for leaders, without a doubt, because your reputation is now at the mercy of not just people, usually angry people, sometimes anonymous, but also at the mercy of the algorithm. Newspapers, television, broadcast, cable, they didn't have an algorithm. It's just people watching. So what I'm noticing now is, when the public decides on an opinion and they take a position and there's enough people in that community with an algorithm, it's very, very hard to go against it.
You are kind of all in on TikTok. I know you're present on other platforms. There are some legislators who want to ban it. What's your advice for brands and for clients about joining TikTok? And then also, what would you do if it was banned?
I don't think it's going to be banned. I think there's a lot of lobbying just from other social media platforms out there. But it's always interesting when I talk to people, the ones who will tell me, I don't like TikTok, I'm not on it, I don't see the value in it. And like a comms person, a DC comms person told me that, the other day. And I think it's such a loss because I think the heartbeat of public opinion is TikTok. It's not Twitter anymore because Twitter is X. I think Twitter used to be the place where you really had the pulse of what was trending and what people were talking about. Like Me Too was a Twitter incident. But now everything happens on TikTok. So even if you're not the face of TikTok, I think every communicator should be on there because that's where all the information is.
Another audience that's really active on TikTok is Gen Z. And
Yes.
I feel like leaders, communicators, we know that Gen Z is a critical audience, but it's also kind of a mystical audience as
Yes.
well. So what can you tell us about engaging with Gen Z and how can brands better reach them? What's their expectation of brands and leaders?
Gen Z operates in their own world. And I have perspective because I'm a mom of 4 Gen Zs in the house. So I tap into them a lot, but I'm watching how they use the medium. And just yesterday, I was speaking with a client and she was telling me how frustrated she was. It's in the entertainment space. That these people who were given a lot of money in a very high profile thing was not getting back to her on email. And I was thinking, it's probably a generational thing. And I asked, did you DM them? I never thought about that. So that's what Gen Z is about. Like, I think they're not a pushy generation. They're not making any demands, but they use technology how they want to use it. And I really feel we all need to adjust, not completely to them, but understand how they use it because that's the future.
I would also say one thing I've noticed is audiences, in part to people like you, have gotten savvier when it comes to the inner workings of PR and communications. You've kind of peeled back the curtain a little bit. You've explained what sources close to mean. You dive into these issues. You dive into apologies as well. So talk to me about the art of an apology. And then I also want to ask you about like cancel culture. Is Gen Z all in on cancel culture? Is cancel culture canceled?
I wish someone could come up with a new term for cancel culture because nobody likes it, but no one's found that new term. I think there were two key moments in 2023, which, let's face it, it was a bonkers year, absolutely bonkers. Was April and a week ago. Bud Light and the congressional hearings, anti-Semitism on college campuses, and what happened there. And watching the apology from Liz McGill, who's now resigned from UPenn, watching that video apology, and I am a contributor for it, so I was doing a story on it, and I interviewed a freshman, first-year student at Penn, and I asked about that apology, because we all knew that it fell flat. We all knew, but why did it fall flat? And he told me, it's almost like watching a YouTuber apology from a YouTuber apology video from like 5 years ago. They go on too long, they're not genuine, they're not authentic, nobody believes it. And if you take a president who looks like they're forced to do it, it's a hostage video, you can see them following, the script on the teleprompter, it's robbed of all authenticity. And Gen Z as a whole gets that, they get that. So that's why I think the apology has changed. The video apology, I think, is going to go by the wayside unless it's a very effective, direct video on social media, like a TikTok, where they're talking to their fans or they're talking to their stakeholders. But just the general one, I don't think we're going to see a lot of those anymore.
Okay, so it's still, people are still doing video apologies, it's just across different platforms and not as staged, is what you're saying.
The staged video apology, and I'd say when I picked onto this was when Will Smith sat down in a highly produced video apology for the slap against Chris Rock, and I thought, that's a trend that's going to end any moment now.
What about the Notes app apology? Is that also out?
The Notes app apology, and I'll say, even though I'm on TikTok, I do work full time as a crisis manager. And this week, I was a part of a few Notes app apologies. We don't see them necessarily on Twitter anymore, because Twitter's now X. That's a whole different game. I think Instagram is where we see the new Notes app. Because usually a crisis will percolate and explode in a TikTok world. And I tell my clients, do not respond where the algorithm is. Go someplace else. And I'll tell them, go to Instagram, because Instagram's more chill. People aren't angry on Instagram. They're just kind of going through stuff. Put your statement on there, and then it tends to go through quicker.
That's kind of counterintuitive, though. Like, I would think that it's blowing up on TikTok. We need to go to TikTok and get in those algorithms and find those people that are very invested and very angry. But you're saying do something different.
Yes, and counterintuitive is the secret. Because most people in a crisis, when I get someone in a crisis, even when I was heading down here today, I had someone call me like, my anxiety level is so high. That's what it is. People just want the crisis to go away. I've had 3 of those this week, and I understand that. If you put them in TikTok, then you're putting them in the algorithm. And if they're in the algorithm, they're going to be with all the angry people and all the haters in the algorithm. And that is the worst place that you can put someone in the middle of a crisis. People are just looking for a response that's authentic and that there's some form of a mea culpa. It doesn't matter where it is. It's just as long as you're on the record somewhere.
We're talking a lot about apologies, but I think we also need to talk about what got Bud Light and what got these university presidents into hot water to begin with. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of corporate communication teams and brands are struggling with how and when to respond to societal issues or geopolitical issues. So what is your guidance there?
I start with the communicators. We all have tough skin. We can all hack anything, but it's the leaders, it's the CEOs, it's the face of the organization, it's anyone who's putting their name and their reputation on the line. They are terrified just to put themselves out there, but they're afraid of the backlash. People now lead for the backlash. What we learned from the hearings last week, the nugget that I took away from it that I thought was interesting, it was kind of buried in the New York Times, is that all 3 presidents used the same law firm to prepare talking points. The two mistakes. One, they went to a law firm. Two, they went to the same law firm, and they were relying on legal and not comms.
Well, and you also, I mean, legal is important, right, when you're testifying before Congress.
Of course.
But you have to walk that line of not opening yourself up to legal risk while
Yes.
also speaking in a soundbite form and also knowing who you're going up against, right? You're not going up
Yes.
against a judge and a jury. You're going up against political communicators.
Yes.
You're looking for that soundbite, right?
Absolutely. Like that hearing was political theater, and everybody knew it was political theater. So the talking points should be treated as such. It's not to say that you remove legal from the room. They should always be in the room, but they should never control the comms messaging. They should never be in charge of comms. And comms people, if you went to college in the 80s and the 90s, I mean, people look down on our degree, but we are so important because we're the ones who have vision. And we understand that leadership is terrified. You need guardrails. That's why you have legal. They're there to protect you. But comms is there to tell you something. That hearing, even though it was a congressional hearing, it was a media opportunity.
Right.
And that's what they forgot, that was going to be a soundbite, and that's exactly what happened.
I also want to ask you about the look ahead, right? This year has been really, really volatile, very political, and I would imagine that going into 2024, it'll become even more so. So what are you anticipating ahead of 2024, or what's the biggest mistake somebody could make during a presidential election year?
Two very good questions, separate questions. One, I think we all learned a lesson in 2020. We all learned a lesson with George Floyd. And that was the time when the rule was everybody had to say something. If you were silent, you were complicit. And that was a problem. And we got used to that. But now all of a sudden, we have a whole different type of geopolitical issue right now with Israel and Palestine. Do you say something? Do you not say something? Do you support one side or another? It's a very confusing place to be. It's very hard to message. And we saw that last week with the congressional hearings. I think what's going to happen now is people are going to give in to the backlash. People are not going to be willing to put themselves out there. I think as comms people, we are going to have to coax and get leaders to still be transparent, authentic, and get the message out there. And I think it's going to be a little difficult.
Do you first see companies focusing more internally as opposed to externally when it comes to their messaging? Even though we know the lines are blurred and things leak.
Yes.
But do you see that being their focus?
Well, that was definitely a way out in terms of the entire Gaza situation with Israel, Palestine, the conflict, then into the war. What you could do is you could focus on the humanity. And what I was telling people is if you don't feel comfortable saying something on the outside, which is okay, because some businesses, they don't need to be in this conversation. Do you need to be in this conversation? But if you always lean towards your values, you lean towards your mission statement, you've already written your statement. And if you lean internally, check in with your staff, check in with your internal stakeholders and worry about them. That type of energy eventually gets out, and they feel safer in that environment.
We have about a minute left, so I want to do a quick lightning round.
Yes.
If that's okay with you. So who had the worst year?
The worst year, Bud Light, without a doubt. There's no doubt.
Who had the best year?
Taylor Swift, naturally. Oh my goodness.
Okay, I'm glad you brought
the
her
machine.
up.
Yes.
I'm glad you brought her up. We have an ongoing debate at Axios in our Swiftie Slack channel. A lot of us are Swifties. PR relationship, real relationship.
If I answer that question, half the room is going to come up and run me off the stage. I've never received more hate on TikTok because I said it was a PR relationship. But people who work in public relations know all that is a mutually beneficial relationship. It doesn't mean that they're not in love. It doesn't mean that there's not a relationship, but they both clearly benefit from it.
All right, who is a brand or a public figure that you're paying a lot of attention to that you think is doing it right, aside from Taylor Swift?
Oh, that's doing it right?
Yeah.
I have to say coming out of 2023, I wouldn't say it's just one person, but a real playbook that we can look at is the WGA, because they were able to really win that strike because it was today's TikTok comms response versus AMPTP's old school playbook. They were responding from the 90s and they did it with no money. It was the cheapest, inexpensive campaign ever.
All right, last question. One piece of advice for Elon Musk. What is it?
Does he even take advice at this point? He's going to keep doing what he's doing, but I do think this as a takeaway And I still wear an emergency manager hat, from I worked at FEMA. I think the real question is how effective is X right now for very, very serious messages? What I'm thinking of is where do we go now? Is there one other platform? Do we spread it out, or do we go to websites? But that's what I think every communicator should be thinking about now.
Okay, we always like to end on one fun thing. So my question for you, what does your TikTok algorithm look like?
Well, aerospace engineering, renewable energy, Shakespeare, or Taylor Swift, and that's just by the nature of the job, Scandival, and Ozempic.
Interesting.
Not for me, but watching others.
All right, Molly McPherson, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Okay, last but not least, we have the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Chief Communications Officer of Activision Blizzard. Please welcome Lulu Meservey. Hi, Lulu. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, guys. Okay, I look at you as a real communications trailblazer. And I have to ask you, just because I think it's the perfect introduction, can you tell everybody here what your Twitter bio says?
Maybe.
I can if you can.
Yeah, please.
It says, Meservey isn't your typical corporate Flack. And that's a quote from the information.
I like that.
Yeah. So talk to me, what do you think that means?
So Adam Lashinsky wrote this. I think I was working at Substack at the time. And the context of our conversation, he was doing this profile on me, and the context of our conversation was doing comms in a different way that is a bit more direct, that is sort of in the fray from inside of the stadium. And so I think that's what it refers to.
And just to back up, so you were at Substack prior to joining Activision Blizzard, but you were on the board of Activision before taking on this role. So talk to me about that jump. And also I want to dive into how you got on that board, why you think comms needs a role on boards.
Okay, so after Substack, my career aspiration was kind of just to be unemployed for a little bit. I wasn't very good at that, and so I joined the board, and I actually think every corporate board in the world should have somebody that understands reputation and comms and trust. Because your job as a board is governance, it's accountability, it's strategic planning. You literally can't do a couple of those things if you can't communicate that to people. Actually, all three of those. You can't do strategic planning if you can't clearly communicate to people what the strategic plan is. You can't effectively do governance or accountability. You can't do transparency. You can't build trust if you don't have an instinct for how to do that. Now, you don't have to be a classically trained professional communicator to do that. So I'm not saying that every board that doesn't have that is handicapped. But I'm also saying that that specific, explicitly laid out skill set is just as important as someone who's good at finance. And so if you're looking, boards that are looking for members with these skill sets should think about, do we have at least one person who has a strong instinct for comms and culture, reputation, and trust?
One board that was communication handicapped was the OpenAI board. What was your reaction to that? How could they have handled it differently? What are some lessons that you think boards should take away from that?
It's a tough one, and I'll try not to Monday morning quarterback it too much. But I feel bad for them because they have now become synonymous with a board losing trust. In fact, the predictive text in my head when you said one board, I was like, oh, OpenAI.
Yeah.
I won't go through the play-by-play, but I'll say that one big lesson from this whole episode that people are not talking about enough is the importance of internal comms, employee comms. Because an external crisis is inconvenient, and internal crisis is existential. And so when we saw all of the back and forth, the one thing that every time it moved, the entire situation pivoted was employees. And that's the thing where the board lost the trust of employees. That would be my number one takeaway from this whole drama that I don't think people are talking about.
You've had a big year. You've been there for what, about 15 months. You've navigated a lot, most notably one of the biggest deals in gaming history, one of the biggest acquisitions in Microsoft history. So what can you tell me about navigating through that $70 billion battle with the FTC?
I feel like it navigated me. I mean, it's sort of like going through a Tough Mudder. And I say that in a good way. Like if you're showing up and you think you're gonna run like a family-friendly 5K, and then there's like fire and mud pits, you're gonna be like, WTF is this? And it will be very stressful. But if you're showing up ready to run a Tough Mudder, it's gonna be a blast. Like it'll still be hard, it'll still be stressful, but it's a different kind of stress. And I think all of us, everybody in this room, everybody listening, has to show up for work with that attitude. Because the thing, we don't have, like, people tell me, oh, you join these situations, you jump into situations when it's like wartime, you're like a wartime comms person. We all are, there is no peacetime. There's a great book called Once an Eagle that I always quote, and it's on a lot of military reading lists for good reason. And one of the lines at the very beginning in the introduction is, a year that you think is a peace year is either actually a pre-war year or a post-war year. And that's the case for everybody.
I love that we're going here because one fun fact, there are many, but one fun fact about you is that you studied counterterrorism in grad school.
Yes.
How has that influenced your comm strategy?
I know more about that than I know about comms, frankly. And so I think about it through that lens. I think about counterinsurgency and having to wage a campaign to win hearts and minds. I have to think about something, taking something that may be unpopular, maybe for good reason. There's different types of situations where you're trying to win hearts and minds. And there are playbooks for doing this that companies might not be using. And so I think about that framework a lot. You are outgunned in a way, you are the underdog in a way, you don't hold power over the traditional institutions. So how are you going to do this? It has to be asymmetric. And I think for most companies today, you do have to think about running these campaigns for hearts and minds.
So talk to me about building a movement. I feel like that's something that you did throughout this battle. You were very active on social media. I know you were kind of rallying the troops, but also putting forth messaging and pushing back hard against regulators. Talk to me about that strategy.
Okay. People will ask me, like, I'm active on social media, and I'm active on X, nay, Twitter. I don't do that for personal fulfillment or mental health benefits. I started doing it as a form of leverage, because at the time we were really trying to shape how people think through issues, and I felt like I had to get in the fray and make the argument directly, as opposed to sort of try to pitch somebody on it and then they put their spin on it. And especially if you are the underdog, and especially if you're trying to carry a message that might not be popular, you're not going to have a lot of people willing to translate that for you. So I think with building a movement, first of all, everybody needs to. You can't do the Hearts and Mind campaign if you don't build a movement. Probably the three parts of building a movement. I need to think more about this in a more sophisticated way, but I think fundamentally there's three parts. One is you have to actually be, it hurts me inside to say this, in the arena. You have to actually be in the fray, because no one's going to do this for you. So startup founders should be going direct. Comms people should be saying this from themselves as a human being, as opposed to like unnamed anonymous spokesperson saying something that could have come out of ChatGPT. Like, we have to do this. And so for me, we were joking about me and my cosplay at BlizzCon, where I went as a rogue from Diablo. And it took forever. Like, I'm a cosplay noob. I had like someone help me, and there were all these buckles. It took, honestly, forever. I was late for everything. But you're in the community. Like, why would anyone listen to me about, in this case, gaming, if I didn't play Diablo, and if I weren't there as one of the community members, if I showed up like on a different floor of the convention center from everybody else? So that's one, is like you have to actually get in there so you have the license to speak. Two is you have to tell people what's in it for them. Anytime you build a movement, And I'm actually reading a book right now about mass movements. People join mass movements when they think that there's something missing and they see this opportunity for dramatically improving something about their life. That's what they care about. They're not going to join a movement to shill for a corporation. That's not exciting. And so you have to frame it in terms of what they get out of this, what's in it for them. For example, a lot of crypto companies mess this up, where they got so excited about this is built on the blockchain and this is Web3, it literally became a joke. Like it was a punchline that there was no use case for Web3 because nobody talked about a use case. It was all just excited about the back end. And then the third thing is you have to put it in a form factor that will spread. So you have to give people something that makes it easy to spread. It can be a meme, it can be a catchy phrase, it could be, for example, when you see like the EAC in people's Twitter bios, that's a meme that spreads. When you hear the slogans, some of the iconic ones like time to build, software is eating the world, move fast and break things, just do it. These are things that are so catchy and so compact that they spread. Or like Barbenheimer, the Barbie movie, and then the two to get like, that was so, they literally made a template where you could put your own face into the Barbie poster. And it just made it easy for you to spread. You didn't have to think about like, what am I gonna do to signal that I'm into one of these movies?
But is it a mistake to try to go viral? Like, should that always be the
Yes.
goal? Okay.
It should actually never be the goal.
Okay.
And I'm glad you raised that because sometimes people will say, well, I want to go viral, or I want to build a cult around my product just for like, because that feels good and my mom's fridge is empty. And so I think that's a mistake. It's a sugar high. And you might not get the people that you want in this cult that you're building, or you might go viral for the wrong reasons, or it's just a waste of time. So I think it has to start with, what is the business outcome? Mm-hmm. Are we trying to recruit people? Are we trying to sell more widgets? And then it's, how do we spread the message that's gonna make those people wanna buy those widgets? And you go from there, you kind of work backwards.
I heard you recently on Lenny's podcast, which I do think is required listening for communicators out there. And you talked about the business outcome and comms role in supporting business outcomes. And you said one thing that I thought was really great, which is like every comms problem can be solved in a one-page Google Doc, which I think is so true. And part of that is this math formula that you came up with, right? Can you tell everybody here what that math formula is?
Yeah, every comms problem can be planned in a one-page Google Doc. Okay. You get stuck if you never leave the doc. It's sort of like if a doc gets shared in a forest and no one hears it. Like, you have to actually go and execute on the doc. The equation, it's a physics equation. It's P equals F over A. It's pressure equals force over surface area. In physics, if you hit something with the same amount of force, if it's sharpened to a point, you'll puncture through. And so if I'm trying to rip this piece of fabric, I could be doing this all day. And instead, if I were to just puncture through with one small hole or one small cut, the whole thing would open up, as opposed to like, some big flat surface. Anyway, belaboring that aside, in comms, it's the same thing. If you are able to sharpen your message to a point and refine it to be like, I want to reach this precise type of person with this precise thing that's going to make them just like sit up at 3 a.m. and think about it, that's going to puncture through, because we all have insane information overload. That's a truism at this point. Whereas if you try to spread yourself too thin and you're saying 10 different things, people are just going to forget about it.
And it's also about finding that really engaged audience, right?
It's about finding the right audience. Hopefully they're already engaged or they're engageable, but it should be the people that you actually care about. I think PR is becoming outdated for a lot of reasons. And one of those is that the P in PR doesn't matter. I don't care about the public. Like as communicators, who is the public? You might have a very wide range of people you care about, like Josh does, everybody flies. Or you might have a very narrow range, but you got to know who those people are. It can't just be sort of this nebulous concept of humanity. And that's how do you speak to that?
One thing you posted yesterday that I thought was really interesting. You said founders need to own their communication.
Yeah.
That's probably scary for people in this room, and I don't think it's working out well for Elon Musk. I'd love your take on that. But what do you mean by that? Why is that authenticity and ownership important?
If we're talking about building a movement, no one joins a movement without a human being as its leader. Every movement has to have an actual breathing, pulse-having person that inspires you. Because if you're going to trust, that trust has to go somewhere. The trust isn't going to attach to the C Corp. And so there has to be a person that's visible. The founder also, especially with startups, the founder has a very specific vision that is different from anybody else. You could have a team made up of people who have worked at 20 different companies before, and they're going to kind of give you their average of their experiences, but you could just end up sounding and feeling like everybody else. It's hard to make your company feel and sound distinct and have a distinct message if it's done by committee. It's like nobody ever built a statue to honor a committee. And if it's not your voice, you're losing some of that beautiful spikiness that founders bring.
But I would say founders might argue, like, I don't have time for that. I'm doing other things, or it's not a priority. So what's the argument there?
The argument is those founders are not going to make it. NGMI. Those founders are not going to make it. Because if you don't have time to own your reputation and you don't have time to proselytize about the thing you're building, why would anyone come work for you? Like, think about your first employee. That person could go get a great job at Google, and instead they're going to come and work for you for this, like, janky MVP and like your 2 customers. And why would they do this? So if you don't have the time to personally take ownership of that narrative and win people over, you're not going to have the time to be a good recruiter or a good salesperson.
You mentioned recruiting, and I want to turn that into our one fun thing because we are running out of time. But the first time I ever talked to you, you were telling me about this amazing team that you were building, and you said, I hire people off of vibe.
Yeah.
So as the one fun thing, what's the vibe?
Oh, the vibe that I hire people off of?
Yeah.
Someone recently described it as people who hold a knife between their teeth. And it's a little bit of that. I look for people who are personally charming. I look for people who have a sense of humor. I look for people that I want to be in the foxhole next to. And I figure I can teach them how to write a thing. I can teach them how to call a reporter. There's almost nothing that I couldn't teach them. But I can't teach them when they get on the phone with a reporter or when they're in the room with the executive how to be winning on a personal level and how to make eye contact and inspire trust and how to think on the spot. So I think if you catch the vibe from somebody, that there's a short story called Message to Garcia. And the whole point is people are given a message to take to a guy called Garcia. They don't know who he is, where he is, they're in a jungle, and there's sort of 2 types of people. One is, tell me who he is, where are his coordinates, do I have all the material, I need dry socks, I need my granola bar. Or there's people who are like, got it, I'll let you know when it's done. And they just figure out everything else themselves. And so I guess a better distillation would be the vibe is the people who get the message to Garcia.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I give a
Thank you.
quick thank you to the Weber Chainbait Collective for making tonight happen. Thank you to the amazing Axios team. Thank you for another great year. Please mingle, enjoy drinks, and have a happy holiday.